mutual acquaintances, and I said, I thought you might be interested in this. Well, I was surprised to get a letter back from Congressman Finley saying, if you don't mind, I'd like to pass this on to someone who has been urging me for years, for several years, to do what you have done. That is, write a book about the Mossad connection to the JFK assassination conspiracy. Well, to make a long story short, the congressman passed the manuscript on to a former French national of Portuguese descent living in exile from France in Canada. This gentleman, whom I have named in the book, but I'm not going to name him here in the air because there's no use subjecting him to further abuse by the Mossad, but the Mossad knows who he is, and he's been mentioned in the book. This gentleman received the manuscript and wrote me a letter and said, well, Mr. Piper, it's a good book. You miss a few important angles here. But then he fed me some details which confirmed my own suspicions about the involvement of the CIA's James Angleton, the CIA's liaison to Israel's Mossad, confirmed further details that I dug out, from a lot of published material. And he also pointed me further in the French connection direction. I like that phrase, the French connection, because the French connection is really the Israeli connection, folks. And you know what happened? I thought I had a good manuscript, and I said to myself, oh my God, I'm going to have to dig into this French connection further, because I said to myself, I have a feeling there's something there, but I just don't know that much about the history of France, and I don't know where France ties into the history of the Middle East, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So one day after I thought I had a completed manuscript, I went down to the D.C. Public Library, and since I'd lost my library card and had a couple overdue books, I couldn't even borrow any damn books from the library, so I had to pull them off the shelves and take all my notes there in handwritten notes. This took a lot of time, folks. But in any case, I spent about 6 hours in the library with about 10 or 12 different books dealing with a subject that I knew nothing about. I didn't know anything about the Algerian War, about the French colony of Algeria, the Arab country of Algeria that emerged from being a French colony, and I didn't realize the Israelis had such a part in trying to prevent Algeria from becoming a free republic. I didn't realize that there were disloyal officers in French intelligence and in the French military who objected to President de Gaulle's decision to grant independence to Algeria. I didn't realize that these French officers and intelligence officials were tied up with the Corsican Mafia, the French Corsican Mafia. I didn't realize all these things, and I didn't realize how deeply the Israeli Mossad had roots inside France, inside the French government, inside French intelligence, even inside the Arab country of Algeria among the French community there. But I discovered it all, and then I started putting it all together, and I realized what this Frenchman had told me made it even more obvious and more solid that this so-called French connection to the JFK assassination that so many people had written about, they had only gone as far as the French connection. But the French connection was a very clever cover for the Israeli connection. Well, I ended up expanding my manuscript and rewriting several chapters. And, it's kind of funny. After the book was written, a fellow named Philippe Rockholt wrote me, and he described the book. He said, this book truly ties everything together, the missing link I've been looking for. As a French citizen and as a Jew, I found the French-Israeli connection fascinating and a logical conclusion. As Shakespeare said, truth will come to light, murder cannot be hid. But the point is, folks, that what's interesting is these French officers and intelligence officials who were involved in the JFK assassination evidently were the ones who arranged for French assassins on behalf of a Mossad official who spent many years in France, Yitzhak Shamir, who later became Prime Minister of Israel. So Yitzhak Shamir was one of the primary Israeli Mossad officials involved in the JFK assassination. He evidently recruited at least one or two of the assassins, or somebody involved in the assassination through contacts in French intelligence. And when President de Gaulle found out about this, he expelled the Mossad from France. President de Gaulle had previously been a strong supporter of Israel's nuclear weapons program, but he withdrew back in the early 1960s. At the same time, John F. Kennedy was trying to stop Israel's nuclear weapons program. And as a consequence of that, there were assassination plots against Charles de Gaulle carried out and funded by a mysterious group based in Rome, no less, known as Permandex. Well, folks, it all ties back into the JFK assassination because, as I pointed out here in our last detailed discussion, Permandex was an Israeli Mossad operation, and serving on the board of directors of Permandex was no less than Clay Shaw of New Orleans, the businessman targeted by New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison. And the chief executive officer of this shadowy company, which was no more than a Mossad money laundering operation and arms procurement front, and my guess, my supposition, also involved in laundering funds to Israel's nuclear weapons program. The chief executive officer, the chairman of the board of directors, was Louis Bloomfield of Montreal, a henchman of the Bronfman family, a henchman of World Jewish Congress chief Bronfman, Samuel Bronfman. So this French connection is really the Israeli connection. And you know, it's funny that that term French connection should be in such usage because, you know, even the French connection detailed in the famous film by that name covers up, in fact, the critical role of Israel's intelligence service, the Mossad, in the international drug rackets. The Mossad and the organized crime syndicates around the Bronfman family and Meyer Lansky, the towering Jewish mob giant out of Miami, were always, the money laundering was always handled through Lansky and Mossad-connected banks, such as the Bank de Credit International, several Caribbean banks. So even that French connection is really an Israeli connection. And you know what? You know what's so funny about the intelligence community? A lot of times the Israelis hide in plain sight. You know, when they want to play a joke on the people they're trying to abuse, you know, in other words, they'll just call, you know, even though the French connection has been thoroughly examined in my book in the JFK assassination, and it's apparent that the French connection is the Israeli connection, they'll still use titles like that, you know, to just kind of throw it in your face and say, hey, you know, this is how it works. That's the famous mystery written by Father Brown, and I was tipped off to this by another JFK assassination researcher. It tells how a burglar who wanted to commit a major robbery at a high-class dinner where all the guys were wearing tuxedos and the waiters were all wearing tuxedos, what the guy did was pose as a waiter wearing a tuxedo so he could move back and forth in plain sight. So sometimes when somebody's putting something right in your face and telling you they're a Mossad operation, don't assume that it's not. The French connection to the JFK assassination is the Mossad connection, folks. All right, well, let's go to our callers. We've got Bob in Texas who's been sitting patiently. Bob, welcome back.
Hello, Michael. I know I said I wouldn't call.
No, I'm glad you did.
Well, I found that listening to your rebroadcasts are really rich with information, and I have 4 questions based on what you said last week.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. 1, the Dallas Uranium and Oil Company. You said that, are you pretty sure that they were somehow involved with Israel's uranium?
No, I cannot say specifically that they were. I only suggested that it was very, very interesting that a company with an interest in uranium, owned by a Jewish gentleman who had.
Okay, I got you.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Well, just pretend for a moment that there was.
Okay.
If there was, then that would be the connection, because, see, that uranium company would be aware of the problem that Israel was having with Kennedy, even if nobody else in the world was aware of.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I agree with you 100%.
Okay, and I've done research on them, and they occupied the 6th floor of the Daltex building.
Okay.
Okay. The second thing you said was you thought there were 2 plans. But no, I'm not putting words in your mouth. There might have been 2 plans. There was probably a backup plan, because that morning it was raining. Okay? Now, if it was raining, they probably wouldn't have shot Kennedy, because he would have had a bubble on his car. So they would have had a backup plan at the Trade Mart.
As a matter of fact, I'll tell you what, I just had a conversation over the Labor Day weekend with a gentleman, and I don't want to name him on the air, but he has been, I guarantee you, he has done far more in-depth research on the JFK assassination than I've ever done. And, in fact, that's one of the subjects we discussed. He mentioned that, in fact, there had been evidence of a backup plan for a shooting at the Trade Mart, and he even went so far as to say that there may have been, believe it or not, now I asked him to go into the details, we didn't have time, there may have even been a bomb on the Kennedy limousine.
Okay, but the point is that if it had rained, they probably wouldn't have carried out the shooting on Elm Street.
Right, exactly.
Okay, so I'll bet they had a backup plan.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right, and you said that they were the ones that scheduled the Trade Mart visit.
Right, exactly.
Now, if the morning of that morning it was raining, okay, and because I checked out the weather, and I even have a picture of Kennedy talking in Fort Worth, and everyone has umbrellas. So there had to be a point in time during that day where the conspirators weren't sure what to do, okay, because it was raining, and then it became sunny. Anyway, I can't carry that any further. I'm just throwing that out for you.
Good for you. No, absolutely. I'm glad you brought it up.
Okay. The next thing relates to hiding in plain sight. Now, I don't know how far I go. I don't mean to impugn anything wrong. Oh, I looked at the Daltex building, and it looks to me like the 2nd through 6th floors were rented by, well, I won't go into that. Let me go into this one.
Go ahead.
What do you know about Mr. Zapruder?
Well, there are a lot of people who think that Abe Zapruder may have been
hiding in plain sight.
Well, that he was kind of tipped off, or that he was definitely connected.
He was definitely in the right spot. The assassination took place right in front of him.
Yeah.
Okay.
This whole issue of Zapruder and what he knew or didn't know. So there are a lot of people who actually believe that he may have been, not that he was one of the assassination plotters, but I have heard it suggested that one of the gunmen may have actually been firing from Abe Zapruder's office in the Daltex building, because that's where he had his offices, and he was a partner of this Mr. Friedman, who was involved not only in the uranium business but also in garment manufacturing. They were business partners.
Well, I looked it up on Wikipedia. He was an immigrant from Ukraine, okay?
Mm-hmm.
A Jewish immigrant.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay? And apparently his camera was loaded with the best Kodachrome 2 safety film that you could buy, okay? In other words, it was very good film, all right?
Mm-hmm.
It had a zoom lens on it. And if you look at where he was situated, he was not very close. He was pretty far back.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, he was almost back at the fence, and he was standing on a pedestal.
Mm-hmm.
And from what I read, there were a lot of people with cameras that day, but he was the only one on the side where the president was. All of the other pictures were from the other side.
Yeah.
So all I'm saying is,
isn't it interesting?
It's interesting.
All right.
I better hang up now.
Okay, Bob. Thanks for your call.
Okay, bye.
All right. Very interesting input.